welcome everyone. It's super nice to see you all today. So welcome to this first event of this autumn campaign in open science under the title Open Engaged Research. This is going to be the first event of this campaign with the title Engaged Research Stories in the Era of Open Science. My name is Hielke Grootendorst. I'm the Executive Director of ERIM, which is one of the co-organizers of this event, together with DIT. I'll leave this to Julia to say what DIT is. We have a very busy agenda today. We have 1 hour ahead of us to do all the work, and it's going to require work from you as well. So thank you for signing up for this. And I think I will start with a very fundamental question. No, let's go to the agenda first. I'll make a preamble of why we're having this event and what is the connection between open and science and engaged research. And then we're going to go through what is engaged research, through some stories, and then we're going to put you to work because we want you to explore some fundamental questions today together with us. Then we're going to wrap it up, and then it's going to be coffee and networking because we wanted to lure you to come to this event. So that's the reason, that's the coffee there. So jokes aside, so it's important to set the scene today. So we want to explore a fundamental question. What is the connection between open science and engagement? Someone can argue this is already in the definitions. So in the Declaration of Open Science from the UNESCO, we know that open science is about opening up the science processes to the other scientists, but also to society, involving stakeholders, but also to do that for the benefits of science and society. So it's already there in the definition. Normally, in the depiction we have of open science, this comes under one pillar, that of citizen science. And that's a bit of an old-fashioned way to look into that, because citizen science is a term that is quite controversial. And it really fails to do justice to the myriads of ways and approaches in which researchers engage with their stakeholders throughout their research process. And we see that this is now changing. So internationally, we see a trend, for example, from the European Commission, but also nationally, under the last consultation in the Open Science Program of the Netherlands, that citizen science is really being replaced. Citizen science is being replaced by other terms like societal engagement or public engagement at large. And that's really a shift, and that's the reason we also want to explore this connection between openness and engagement. And this is why we're having this event today. So today, the next step is to explore what is engaged research. We have an expert on that, so I'm going to call you on stage for that. And then we're going to go through 2 stories. We think it's a very engaging way to actually share experiences through 2 researchers and 2 professional services staff that actually supported the researchers. But first, what is engaged research? I would like to call on stage Julia Wiedmeyer, yes, from DIT, to give us a preamble of that. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Chrissa, for the introduction. So the event is co-organized by DIT, and DIT stands for Design Impact Transition Platform. It's a platform that is awarded by the university with the task to provide an environment for researchers that want to work in more transformative ways, both in their education as well as in their research. And what that then means, transformative ways, I think that's what we all need to think through together as a university. How would we like to create the societal impact that the university is talking about? And the platform, DIT platform, tries to provide us the space with doing so. For example, today, I've been announced as an expert in engaged research, but I rather share this expertise with all of you. So the question I would like to reverse and put it to the room: what is engaged research for you? Anybody?
Action research.
Action research, yeah. Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
Research where you're doing work in the field.
Yeah. Working in the field with people, yeah, or stakeholders, yeah.
Co-creating.
Co-creating, yeah.
Valorizing.
Valorizing your research, yeah. Mm-hmm. Going the whole way. Anybody else? One more? Yeah.
Maybe not only answering a research question, but also answering a question that is societal.
Yeah. So not only what is relevant for scientific knowledge development, but also addressing societal issues. Yeah. Okay. I've of course prepared a slide. But basically, the first thing to say that engaged research is just one way, and we use it basically as an umbrella term at the Design Impact Transition platform, because if you come from different disciplines, you will take a different approach towards engaging with societal stakeholders in your research. So you can term it action research. In the more social sciences, engaged research, it's called often in the organizational and management sciences. Transdisciplinary research from the environmental sciences. So it's really very different terms that come together. And we try to use the term engaged research as an umbrella because it's also broader than only engaging. It also includes valorization, as one of you just said. So these are the 4 points that I think really is these different types of engaged research share. So it's about complex societal problems, not only research problems, but complex societal problems. These as a starting point. It's about collaborating in participative forms of research. Then the outcomes should not only be scientifically sound knowledge, but also helping to actually address this societal problem, bring it a step further. And it's something that's iterative and reflexive. It's usually you try to engage with the people for a longer period of time, whether that's policymakers or in a community, wherever you put your research. And this type of research is different to what we do usually in the different faculties. So there is many different challenges that are posed by this kind of research. And I think one reason of us coming together is that it demands different skills from us as researchers and competences. So for example, we all can write maybe a Veni and a Vidi grant and excel or not at doing so, but writing a collaborative grant is something completely different. It requires us to have, to work with questions from, for example, policymakers, include them in the proposal, work with different timescales that they have. So it means from us, we're not only researching, but we're also knowledge brokering, facilitating these processes to get towards those grants, but also the research processes as such. So it requires us to take on very different roles throughout. And I think some of these challenges we want to explore today, because many of these are at this interface of research work and what's called support work, right? We have lots of support staff at the university, we have lots of researchers, and sometimes there seems a kind of a divide between these two worlds. And we want to bridge them today to see how we can work together, because only if we work together, that's where we can do the best of engaged research. And I would leave it here and give back the mic to Chrissa. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. So now we had this preamble, the introduction, and the next on the agenda is to actually hear the stories of the people that Julia mentioned, so a researcher and a research support professional that have worked actually in a collaborative grant. So I would like to call on stage Adrian and Christian. Please introduce yourselves, because I'm very bad with names. So thanks a lot for that.
Would you want to go? Okay. My name is Christian Hielke. I'm an associate professor in cultural economics at Erasmus School of History, Culture and Communication. And, well, as far as I can tell, one thing I could add to the presentations we saw so far, which already, confirmed what I expected, but put it into much more of a structure. One thing in my experience is that engaged in open research for me meant going out of my comfort zone. Very much indeed, I have to say. In all kinds of respects, maybe we'll get there in a minute, but beforehand, Adrian will actually tell us why we qualify to be allowed to speak here today.
All right, and I'm Adrian Sneo. I'm the head of grant support at Erasmus Research Services. My focus and my team's focus is engaged research. Apparently, we really want to stimulate and support our researchers to translate their expertise into major research initiatives, which we define as large-scale, high-complexity projects with several stakeholders, and where is the leading party. And this, I think, is an example of just how big and how engaged that can be, in which Christian and I partnered together, and well, we were successful. So first, we thought we'd talk a little bit about what is the EIT, since not everybody will be familiar with it. EIT stands for the European Institute of Technology. It is European, but it's not an institute and it is not related to technology. So that's where the confusion starts. And the EIT is essentially the European Commission's response to the fact that Europe has the highest amount of doctorate students in the world, but in terms of innovation, in terms of translating that knowledge into new services, products, policies, we lag behind compared to, for example, America or China. And so they looked at America and they thought, okay, what's working for the Americans is Silicon Valley. How do we organize a Silicon Valley in the European space where you have 27 now member states, which each have a different culture and are distributed over Europe? How do we create an innovation ecosystem similar to that one, where you have research institutions, higher education institutions, companies, and cities involved? And that's what the EIT is an answer to. Now, EITs are thematic. There already are 8 in existence on the themes of digital, climate, etc. And what we worked on was the proposal to create a new EIT around the topic of culture and creative industries. This was the vision of the EIT Culture and Creativity. It was to unlock the latent value of the cultural and creative industries in Europe. 90% of the cultural and creative industries companies are SMEs, which is a big focus of the European Commission's economic strategy. And the cultural and creative industries represent 5.5% of Europe's GDP, which is more than many people would expect when you think of this particular sector. So to develop this ecosystem, we worked with a huge amount of societal partners. We started in our bid with 50 partners in 20 European nations. Yeah, that's us. 17 partners in the RIS region, so the expansion regions of the European Union. And we have both for-profit and non-profit partners involved. These 50 is just the start. This is the 50 with whom we wrote the application. The idea is that over time, this ecosystem will attract more partners. Here's a list. I'll give you a second to quickly scan it of everyone who was involved, and you can get a sense of the very different perspectives that they're coming from a company like Ogilvy, which of course focuses on marketing, pure marketing consultancy, and Philips, which you all know, to maybe more research or culture institutes like the Goethe Institute, a number of universities, of course, and a number of network organizations as well. So Julia was talking about working with societal partners and collaboratively. Well, here's a consortium of 50 partners. And I guess that's why, as Christian was saying, we qualified to speak here today. I'll skip this one. The way that it's organized, so I was talking about imitating Silicon Valley in Europe and how would they do that. So this was organized through these 6 called co-location centers, which are distributed across Europe, and then each of them has a focus region in which the different partners of that region would converge and come together and form a local ecosystem. So, for example, we have the co-location center Southeast, which would be partners from the south of France, Spain, and Portugal. We'd have so on and so forth. In our case, we're part of Co-location Center Northwest, which includes the north of France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and the UK. This is what we're hoping to be working towards as a result of the EIT, is that our research in collaboration with societal partners results in a number of accelerators and incubators in the European Union for Cultural Creative Industries, SMEs, an investment club, newly trained professionals through our education offering, and to contribute to the smart specialization strategies of the regions in Europe. and this was part of what the application centered around. We were focusing on creative industries, but also on our focus on the digital and the green transition, which are also big policy priorities for the European Union. So we are cultural creative industries. We included circular fashion, sustainable architecture, inclusive design. And you can, I'm not going to read it all out loud for you. And finally, when we look at the impact that we were hoping to achieve, this is the impact journey summarized in our application. Of course, the focus of EIT really is on innovation, so it focuses a lot on creating new startups, new services, and new innovative education. So over the course of 10 years, by 2037, or 15 years, we hope to have 35 novel curricula, 1,100 startups that have reached further investment, a number of students that we've educated and prepared for to work in a way that combines entrepreneurship, academia, and societal needs. And then you have some nice numbers there at the bottom of the percentages of the cultural and creative industries that we are hoping to affect through this great ecosystem. That's the end of the slides. And we thought, after we've given you some information on what the CIT is about, we could talk maybe a bit about the journey, how did we get there, and how did the collaboration go. And we were thinking we could shape it as a Q&A. So, shoot away.
So who started?
Well, to my understanding, the local government of North Rhine-Westphalia decided that several people in a more individual capacity for decades have been lobbying the European Parliament and other places to start something like this, to channel more funding into basically innovation funding for culture and creative industries, to integrate those better into the innovation system of the European Union. And at some point, the local government, regional government of North Rhine-Westphalia decided, yep, we're going to pay a couple of people to get this going. And lo and behold, the EIT actually announced the call months later, to be honest. And here we are.
Yeah.
That's the starting point. And then, of course, they grew from there.
Yeah, there was an existing, because this is part of, I need to plug this in my role as head of grants. There was a pre-existing network called the European Creative Business Network, who was an association of universities and what they called creative multipliers, like creative agencies, etc. And these were the lobbying organization that Christian was talking about. And I used to be the director of that, which is also how I was involved in this. And it was always our ambition to, at some point, grow into something major like this. Up to that point, it had been on a voluntary basis. Eventually, the lobbying practices worked, but it took about 7 years for it to come to fruition. And then now we're here, and now we have 150 million. But the reason I say I want to plug this is because the importance of networking and being involved in certain networks, sometimes it's not apparent straight away. 7 years ago, we wouldn't have thought that we would be having 150 million to divide right now. But it was that collaboration and over time that has grown into this.
So how did Erasmus came into it?
That's a peculiar story. You would have thought via Adrian, right?
No.
And to some extent, we ended up winning to a large extent because of the excellent initiative taken, amongst others, by Adrian. But the way I experienced it is that I got a call from the now director of the EIT, who at the time, of course, wasn't, who was an employee of the North Rhine-Westphalian government, who I knew because I taught with him together some courses on, innovation in art markets at Freie University Berlin. He called me and told me, listen, we're building up this network. Would you like to introduce us to Erasmus University? I went there. I cobbled together some slides myself, made the sales pitch for Erasmus University, and in particular the cultural economics and cultural entrepreneurship master specialization that we entertain, which is kind of exactly what they wanted. And so it was actually an easy sell because of the excellent, they wanted Erasmus University, somebody of our caliber, and we had a program that was just exactly pretty much ideal as a core initial curriculum to maybe model other things by and to develop further in the context of this. So it was actually easy to sell this to them. It wasn't much of an effort as far as my experience goes. And then the real world work, of course, happens now. Because now we have to start discussing where the money goes and what to prioritize and so on. And you can see how there might be many moving parts there and many interested parties. But that's how it started. And again, it wasn't very hard because it was a pleasure to represent this organization.
How do you keep this network engaged? Because now it's like a huge list of a lot of different parties and it sounds all very interesting, but how do you actually keep the engagement that people work together with each other and that there's that collaboration happening?
Well, that's a challenging question. I think it's still being worked out. Fortunately, we are not the lead in this case, so it's not our full responsibility to do this. Part of that is this idea of the co-location centers, where you break Europe down into smaller pieces, geographically near, so that you can have some physical interactions there. And then they have organized it in such a way that there are 10 strategic directors for 10 different action programs. They come from the partners as well, and then under each of them there are sort of working teams which also come from the partners. So not everyone will be interacting with everyone throughout the course of this. In a way, it will be based on the pillar that you work around. But if you want to, you now have a very close connection to any of the people on that list and the future list, of course, and that's also part of the value. I think I'm getting a sign that it's our time. Yes. So.
Were there any burning questions that you want to ask now? Julia has one.
I was really wondering about your struggles as a researcher in writing.
Comfort zone.
The comfort zone thing you were talking about.
Yeah, well, that's a touchy subject because I was at it for 2.5 years. It took about a year before I managed to spot the right people in this organization. And until then, I felt I was selling to two parties. I was selling to the people in Cologne, selling us, started making, not promises, obviously, I'm not that daft, but they wanted to hear what we could potentially do, and I told them what we could potentially do, what we'd have the capacity of doing, but of course I had no backing. So that was tricky. I had to take a calculated entrepreneurial risk. What did I have to lose? Well, my personal contacts, the quality of those, if I overstated my case. And that was very hard. And I have to say there was a big relief when I finally found the right people. Tanya, Adrian, of course, Mary, several others at the time. But it took a long time. And other people were just too busy to engage. So it was very much a solo act for a while, which wasn't very comfortable, I have to say. If once you're asking, the result speaks for itself. But I felt over my head most of the time, in all honesty.
What kept you going then?
Just taking one step after another. That was about it. What I felt really uncomfortable about was when I thought the people who should decide how and whether to engage kept telling me, keep on continuing. But all of a sudden they felt I should sell this project to them. When I felt, listen, you have to tell me whether you want this, right? So that was really, for me, a breaking point where I really rang the alarm and really said, listen, guys, this is not going to work, right? I'm not selling you anything. I'm informing you as well as I can, but I need other people to decide with me to what extent we're going to invest in this. Some financial layouts were involved and so on. And that was a big breakthrough for me. But it got to the point where I really had to communicate with some urgency to make people realize that this was not something I did for myself within this organization. No, I'm talking about this, what internal processes at Erasmus University Rotterdam.
Yeah.
Right? I felt I had to sell it here after a while, which was a bit peculiar because I didn't have anything to sell. I wanted other people to tell me whether and how to continue with this on our behalf. Right? So
Apparently very normal here.
Is it?
That's not peculiar.
Which is not nice though.
Well,
Normalized.
all I can tell you that the way I work, I found it difficult. Other people might thrive under these conditions. I found that the most challenging aspect of the whole affair when I realized that I was expected to sell this internally as well, rather than getting advice from people and also potentially negative advice if that would have been adequate. Yeah.
We see that with all these kinds of initiatives that we have a strategic direction as a university. We want to do more of this, but at the same time, we don't. A majority of the organization doesn't have the personal experience on it. So, as leadership, they might say, "Yes, this sounds like a good idea. Go do it." But then, they because they haven't been involved themselves, they might not know exactly what support to provide, and that's also part, I think, of our role then to kind of advise on that regard.
Taking it step by step is the only practical advice I can really say, and spot the right people. Now that they're here in particular, I gather they weren't actually here yet.
No, I started a month before we picked this up, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for now. Let's move to the next speakers. There's something here. Just press. Okay. So are you sure? Yes. Okay. And I would like to call on stage Roel and Hans. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Roel van den Berg. I'm the program manager of Smarter Choices for Better Health. Together we have 10 minutes to describe our initiative. The idea is that I will give a very brief introduction, specifically emphasizing the support challenges, and then Hans will provide one concrete example, which conspicuously includes something where I, from the support perspective, were hardly involved, but I think that is a coincidence. And then together we hope to provide a kind of comprehensive impression. So Smarter Choice for Better Health is one of the original 3 Erasmus initiatives which were conceived in 2016, so almost the critical 7 years ago since that Adrian mentioned. They started in 2017. This particular Erasmus initiative is a collaboration between 3 schools, like the others. In our case, it's coordinated by the School of Health Policy and Management, together with Erasmus Medical Center, and the 2 of us are from Erasmus School of Economics. Together, it comprises approximately 20 FTE, somewhat higher number of people, but some of them are involved part-time. And they are organized into 4 interdisciplinary action lines. I will not mention which they are, but it address specific challenges in health and health management. And probably Hans will emphasize a bit more of that. The overall goals why the Erasmus initiatives in general were founded at that time, and also applies to our specific challenge on health, is to stimulate interdisciplinary work, basically meaning work across different schools, which was not very common at that stage, maybe still isn't very common at this stage, and also to emphasize the societal impact of the research that we do, and create more visibility of our research in society at large. So the terms have been used already. It very much relates to open innovation, engaged scholarship, co-creation, etc., but then specifically focused on the area of health. So given that the work that we do is supposed to be interdisciplinary and also intersectoral, so between academia and other areas of society. That creates a number of challenges, and previous speakers have already mentioned them, of course, but I would like to reiterate a bit on that. The key challenge from a support perspective is that you have to reconcile different rules, different systems, different priorities, different criteria that exist within universities, for instance, within different schools, that in one school the best you can achieve is a single authored paper that you've been working on for 3 years or so. And in other schools, they don't take your paper seriously if it doesn't involve at least 20 authors or something like that. And if you put 2 of those researchers together, it takes a while before they make up their mind about what kind of paper they actually have to write. Not even considering the whole debate about what is a top journal in one field and top journal in another, different criteria for what is a good researcher concerning tenure and promotion decisions. If you bring people from different schools together, inspired by whatever it takes on multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, Erasmus values, creating positive impact, la 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 la. And then you start, and in the first meeting you enter this kind of discussion about what you think is a good journal is different from what I think is a good journal. I've added preferences in the end because the first rules, systems, priorities, criteria, they usually still something in writing, or there's some kind of school policy, or there is a system that you need to use. But if you work on this more or less as long as we do for several years, especially in this university, where, for instance, members of the executive board kind of come and go more rapidly than Roman emperors during the most dynamic period of their existence, you also have to deal with preferences, individual preferences that are not put in writing, but one rector having a completely different view on what needs to be done in this kind of context than others. So you also have to reconcile that. In general, I think the answer that you can provide from a support perspective is to create what I've called a secure environment. And I started my good work, you may not believe this, as a bodyguard in the Bronx, protecting people doing all kinds of inclusive work. So be careful when you're in the room together with me on what I mean exactly with providing a secure environment. Yeah, you by now you may start to regret that you have actually invited me. But one key thing is to create clear what I've called ground rules here. So concerning payment, concerning rewards, within the context of the initiative, more or less regardless of what are the rules that are existing within your schools. And of course you have to take them into account, because otherwise you run into trouble with deans and others very quickly. But make clear that you use a certain lump sum payment for your contribution to the work. For instance, we have the rule, if you don't work, you don't get any money. If you, let's say, absent for a while, then the initiative stops paying you, and then the school has to take over. Simple rule. You could have taken another rule, but that's clear to everybody. It's important that you stimulate transparency and trust, so that you communicate with each other, that it's clear that you have decided something for one party, or that there is a specific fund available within the initiative that you can use for certain things, but not for other things, and that everybody knows that people understand why that money has been used for certain people doing certain things. And kind of in maintaining that secure environment, it means that you have to engage in a dialogue with many stakeholders. So within the initiative, but also the deans who are behind this, various controllers, I've already mentioned the members of the executive board, constantly sharing what other people have told you, how you have made up your mind within the initiative, explaining it to others to make sure that there is kind of constant backing. And of course, that also involves a dialogue with the other Erasmus initiatives to make sure that you have a kind of consistent, uniform position in that respect. From here, I hand over to Hans to give you some concrete example.
Yep. Thanks, Roel, for the introduction. My name is Hans van Kippersluis. I'm a professor in the Health Economics group at ESE. And I'll sort of give one specific example of a research project we did over the last year. It's much smaller in scope than the one of the previous presenters, but I think, judging from the definition of Julia, ticks still many boxes from the engaged research, so I'm happy to present it. So one of the sort of themes or action lines, as Roel called them, is prevention. So it's focusing on sort of helping people to behave healthier in a nutshell. And what we did in particular is sort of designing an experiment, a randomized controlled trial in the Erasmus MC on engaging or helping people to engage more in physical activity. That's sort of the context. And what we did is we sort of this research project we called I2B, intention to behavior, because many people have good intentions for physical activity but fail to follow through on those. And sort of to give some sort of very short theoretical background and also to illustrate the sort of interdisciplinary focus of our research. So this project involved some psychologists and health scientists from Erasmus MC, from public health, and also behavioral economists from the School of Economics. And what is interesting when you read the literature in sort of, because both fields, economics as well as psychology, tend to, try and help people and theorize about what drives unhealthy behavior and how we can improve healthy behaviors. And one way of summarizing the health psychology literature, at least from my perspective, is that it's really about skills. We try to train self-control. We teach them how to make implementation intentions and these kind of things. So I would sort of summarize that as skills without any stakes. We train them to how to do it, but there's no real incentive for doing it. And economists tend to take the complete opposite view. They basically pay people to exercise more, or they design some kind of clever commitment contract. And these are stakes, but without the skills to actually, maintain these habits after the skills or after the stakes are taken away. So sort of the basic theoretical background of this randomized controlled trial was trying to sort of develop an e-health intervention that combines stakes with skills. We teach people something and we also give them the incentives to actually act upon these skills. And what was nice and what also made it possible is that it was co-funded by the Trust Funds, but also by a company, a digital health company, that was happy to invest some of their R&D budget into developing this app for us. So that helped, and that made the project financially manageable. And what was also interesting is that we actually could do this experiment among 650 patients roughly of Erasmus MC, of a certain clinic in Erasmus MC, for women who were followed up for after having preeclampsia during their pregnancies. And what is interesting, at least, about this group of patients is that they have a huge risk for developing cardiovascular disease later in life. And we anticipated and hypothesized that at least for this group of people, engaging more in physical activity is particularly relevant. So this is a highly relevant group. And for us, as economists working in the ivory towers here, it was great that we actually were able to sort of draw from this patient pool from Erasmus MC and collaborate with the clinic over there. Now, these are just some screenshots of the eventual app that we collected, so they could track their resting heart rate. That was pulled directly from a Fitbit that we gave to them. They could sort of check their active zone minutes. There was some gamification in there to actually motivate them. So this is just to give you an impression of how it looked like. But what I want to focus on here is also just the complexity of organizing this. And again, even though this was on a smaller scale than the previous project, it still involved many parties. And so I was sort of the project lead from Erasmus University, and there were also some behavioral economists from Erasmus and from ESE in particular involved. But the main work was actually done by the Department of Public Health within the Erasmus MC. That's where the health psychologists worked and the health scientists, and that's also where the bulk of the work was done. But then it also involved the clinic itself, where the patients were drawn from. It involved Avagen, which is the digital health company that actually developed the app for us. And it also involved the distributor of the Fitbits, because we wanted to sort of objectively measure physical activity, so that's why we also gave Fitbits to these people. And then we were working with this distributor. And the reason why I mentioned it is also one anecdote that I wanted to share. So we did some preparation. That's also not, that shouldn't come as a surprise, all of these things. But one thing I just wanted to show you is that how sort of this sort of complex design of different parties can work. Because at some point, the Erasmus initiatives are funded mainly through Erasmus University. So that's sort of the key payer. So all the bills from this distributor should have been sent to Erasmus University, but the actual research was done at Erasmus MC. So that's where the Fitbits had to be shipped to. And the reason why I want to tell this anecdote is that this sort of illustrates, I think, the complexity in doing this, because I was the project lead. So I was sort of, at some point we were ordering these 200, we were ordering the Fitbits in stocks of 200 pieces, and we had ordered the first bunch of 200 Fitbits, but then there were a lot of people signing up actually from the clinic, so at some point we needed more than that. And then we promised to these women that we would send it to them like by the end of September last year. So then I made an order again for another set of 200 Fitbits to this distributor. And they had to be, I believe it was sort of the last week of September, and they had to be sent before Wednesday noon or something to the Erasmus MC in order to everything to be in time. But then I called these people and they said, yeah, but you never paid the first invoice. And I was like, what happened? So I called the controller of Erasmus University and I said, yeah, we never received an invoice. And then they went back to check, and then they sent both, of course, the Fitbits and the invoice to the Erasmus MC. So again, I was sort of making phone calls, I was doing things, and in fact, our PhD student from Erasmus MC, in order to speed up the things, actually went physically to this distributor on a Wednesday morning, I believe, and they were not expecting her, so she made some, this is just, you know, she taking some screenshot of what happened there, and she had to find the Fitbits herself in this sort of big chain. So she spent the entire Wednesday morning, she jumped into the car to some sort of remote industrial area in Tilburg, I believe, drove back to Erasmus MC to put it in the mailbox in time for the post office to pick it up, and eventually it all worked out. But this is just illustrating, I guess, sort of the complexity with working with so many partners, and also sometimes the confusion by these parties. Erasmus, Erasmus MC, it all sounds the same, but it still is, of course, a different physical location. Anyway, let me wrap up by sort of two things. In what sense was this engaged? Well, I think it was engaged, and it was, again, as I said, it ticks many boxes of, it was interdisciplinary, it was using mixed methods. And I guess what was especially important to make it engage is that we first did some qualitative work with the same group, let's say, with some focus groups, like what are your needs and preferences, what do you need? So on the one hand, we had this theoretical idea of, you know, what it takes to make such an intervention successful, but we also actually went to talk to these women before the intervention. One thing we didn't do is actually, at the end, well, we did have some sort of qualitative part at the very end of the intervention to ask, like, what were your experiences, but we didn't actually engage again with them. So that part was lacking, I guess, from your definition. And we're currently doing some dissemination. So that's sort of the end of the cycle, I guess. And in terms of open science practices, we did sort of think carefully about how to do this. And in one sense, we did it sort of scientifically. We published a pre-analysis plan and a full study protocol. Obviously, we had to think about informed consent and privacy policy. But what is also important is that we did some open data practices in the sense that we store the data on a secure drive at the Department of Public Health. But there is a remote access facility available on the anonymized data to both our own researchers, for example, here at Erasmus University, but also external people from other universities. So that's the open science part about it. And just to mention a few sort of lessons, and this is my last slide. So we talked to many people, but one sort of general struggle, I think, is that in this sort of interdisciplinary environment, where I was the project lead from Erasmus University, but most of the work was actually carried out at Erasmus MC, it is just hard to organize support. You need to talk to a lot of people. One other anecdote I remember vividly from last year is that at some point we had to launch the app through the account of Erasmus MC. So I called the IT desk or the IT officer or so at Erasmus MC, and the first thing they ask you, what's your employee number? I was like, yeah, I don't have one. So, I mean, it just makes it hard to sort of work across faculties with their own rules and own systems. And so I guess sort of two things to sort of think about and maybe also start a discussion. One is it is just plain hard to organize support if it involves multiple faculties. And the second thing is just with all kinds of research, with all kinds of engaged research, and I guess Adrian can also speak to that, is that not all tasks can be supported easily. I mean, at some point we thought of hiring research assistants, but then, you know, a lot of the questions we got and sort of answering emails of respondents actually involved being very, very knowledgeable about the process. So we had to do that ourselves. So I also spent around last year around this time, I spent my time, you know, responding to emails of these women engaging with the app and having technical issues. So I guess the bottom line there, and that's the last bullet point, is that we need some recognized and also dedicated time for doing this type of research. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. So, is that?
So
you can please go back.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So we heard two different stories today. One about preparation of a grant and how that goes, and also about a grant that was executed and how that went. And I think that gives us enough food for thought for the next phase of this event, which is about you getting to work. So I would like you to stand up and please spread out in three talking points we have at the back of the room. And they're going to be three different ones, three different topics. I'm assuming funding, then conducting the research, and then dissemination of research. So please take your, there's going to be 3 people moderating. We have 15 minutes to do that. Take your seats, please come on stage, yes. So from each table, from each stand, we have one brave person that was lured on stage. I'm talking about Antonio, he didn't know about this, that we've asked them to give a summary of what was discussed. So we also share the knowledge. So I ask you to do that in 90 seconds each, because I'm really mindful of time. And after that, you stand between the coffee and us. So just please go ahead.
Pressure is up. Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
pressure is up. So go ahead.
I was at the collecting stage of the research, and what we were discussing is I'm starting a new collaborative research project, and my burning question was like, where to save the data and how to share it with these other stakeholders, other universities, businesses out there. Teams and OneDrive, they're not to be shareable by our IT. They don't want us to go outside with it. So I learned today there's a Serve Research Drive that actually works, it seems, but also that support staff doesn't know that from each other. So it's about learning between support staff, but also educating IT. And I think it's really about pressuring IT to open up Teams and OneDrive, because other universities can do this. Why not the ER? Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, I was moderating the dissemination part, unbeknownst to me. So the first question was whether and how the collected data should be publicly accessible and publicly shared. By publicly, we don't necessarily mean to the whole public, but in a broader, sense with others. The first thing that came out was that sharing should happen in a way that is understandable to non-experts, and several examples about the COVID-19 communication about the COVID-19 pandemic. Was mentioned. And then that sensitive data, must be protected, which doesn't necessarily mean that everything should be closed, but there can be techniques or procedures in place that protect participants while simultaneously increase the knowledge sharing. And then the second question, which was the most interesting one, how will the project acknowledge the work of non-academic stakeholders? We focused in particular on participants. And so the conversation revolved around the inclusion of participants in follow-up. For example, after one project, maybe it's a follow-up project, should they be followed? So should the same people be followed? Engagement, valorization, and also impact of the research on their lives. It was mentioned that a randomized controlled trial might have some consequences for some groups and not for others. So the concept of patient care came up, and it's important to follow up on, and asking your participants how they feel. And to increase sustainability, appropriate measures, and especially appropriate methodology, could be followed. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio.
Well, I think we could have learned something from these very productive tables. We had funding as a topic, and we approached it almost from a sort of conceptual perspective of because the first question was, do we need funding? I thought, yes, we do, but apparently that wasn't everyone's opinion. So I think we found out that depending on your position and your type of research, you have different incentives to get external funding. We talked a little bit about the difference between when you do research individually with a data set and you have a tenured position, then sometimes you can just execute your project without needing to go through the hassle of funding. But when you want to work with societal partners, and those partners need funding to execute their share of the activities. That's when collaborative grants become more attractive. We also mentioned that it would be good to have a culture where as opportunities become available, we share them internally, or we are aware of who does what piece of work, so you can involve them across colleagues. And I think towards the end we were also talking about improving internal comms on opportunities and creating internal networks. We didn't get around to talking about external networks.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Thank you. So thank you all three, and thank you all for being here today. I want to wrap up, but I really think we have no time for that. So the key messages from today, we have to sit on them a bit. What we're going to do is going to write them up and follow up with you in a written format. So we can really, because I think it was a lot to take in today and to consider. And after just thanking you for being here and for contribution, I just want to open the floor for coffee. So thanks a lot for being here, and just you're going to hear from us in the next few weeks. Thank you.